to be making a sheet and sending ourselves an email with a link to the sheet. So this is going to be a brand new sheet that we're going to be using, and we're going to create some functions that we can run through in order to update the sheet. So the first one that we're going to be doing is we're going to be looping through and creating extra sheets, and this will loop through the sheet object and create a bunch of sheets with incrementing names, and it will check to see if the name already exists. And if it doesn't exist, then it will create the sheet. If the name does exist, then it's not going to create any new additional sheets. So now when we go into our spreadsheet, we've got a whole bunch of sheets here, all the way up from the original sheet, sheet 1, and then going from S1 all the way up to S10. We did have some existing content in S6 and S7, so they were already existing and they were skipped in the creation process. The next challenge is going to be to interact and select ranges. So we're going to be showing you how you can append a row of content, how you can select a range of content, how you can update the content, and additional how you can select a spreadsheet with a name, adding values into that spreadsheet. And that's going to be all done using the app script. So what that will do is that will update whatever the first sheet is that we have within the list, and it will add to it. If there's another sheet that's the first sheet in the list, it's simply selecting that first sheet and running through and adding content into the sheet. So selecting the ranges in different ways and updating, adding content into the spreadsheets. The next example is going to be how we can add content into the spreadsheet, so multiple rows of content, and using the language app in order to translate the content and show the different language versions of that content. We're going to be adding it into a specific sheet, which is S7. So going over to S7, we can see that we're running this code and we're translating. So if we added more words into the sheet, that will add all of that content to the sheet. So let's run the adder2 function. And now that's adding in all of those words. So those are the words that we had in the array. This is in Spanish, that's Latvian, and that's Korean for those words. And the last function is a cleaning function where we're going to loop through, get all of the data that's contained within each one of the sheets. If the data length is less than or equal to 1, then we're going to log the sheet name into the log and effectively delete the sheet. So run the cleaner function, and that's going to clean up some of these empty sheets that we have within the spreadsheet and list them out within the execution log. And if you run it a second time, all of the sheets now have content, so there's no sheets to remove, so nothing gets removed from the spreadsheet. This lesson, we're going to be looking at the Spreadsheet Service. So create a brand new standalone web application. So that's going over to script.google.com and select to create a new project. And this will open up the app script editor, give the project a name. Since this is going to be for the Spreadsheet app test, give it a name. I'm going to call it Spreadsheet app test. And what the Spreadsheet Service does is allows us to create scripts to create, access, modify Google Sheets. And there's a lot of different functions and a lot of functionality available within the spreadsheets. So within using the Spreadsheet app class, this is where we can start creating spreadsheets. So let's go ahead and we're going to create a brand new spreadsheet. So give this make a name, and this is going to be the spreadsheet object that we're going to be creating using the Spreadsheet app service, and then create. And the create method allows us to create a spreadsheet. We can also specify using it, creating it with a name, and then we can also specify creating it with a specific number of columns and rows. So those are the three parameters. So the name is new sheets. And then the next optional is to add in either the rows and the columns. So the number of rows that I want to make the spreadsheet, let's make it 30 rows, and we'll make it 7 columns. So it's going to be the spreadsheet size. Within the logger log, now that we've got the spreadsheet object, we can get the URL of the spreadsheet, and that will allow us to open it up within the browser window. We can also use the mail app service to send an email. So send the email to the user. Let's get the user email address. So this is going to be my email address. Using the session object, we're going to get the active user method, and there we can get the email address. So that's going to be the email of the account that I'm writing the Google Apps script. So that's going to be the first parameter in the send mail. The next one is going to be the subject, and then the last one is going to be the body contents. And within the body, I'm going to output the URL of the spreadsheet. So we'll create the body, and this will include new sheet at, and then the location of where the sheet is going to be located. I'm actually going to do this as a separate variable and just add it in as the URL value within the body. And then we're going to send the body of the email. So let's run the code and accept the permissions and create our brand new spreadsheet using the make sheet function that we just created. So accepting the permissions to the Google account. And these are the permissions. So we've got the email as well as creating, updating, and deleting spreadsheets. That's our URL of the spreadsheet, and we'll check our Gmail to check out what was sent to that user. So going over to the Google account, I've got the security alert where I accepted the permissions for the app to run, and then this is the email that was generated and sent. So it's got the new sheet linked, and it's also connected within the email. So I could click either one of these in order to open up the spreadsheet that was just created. The spreadsheet was created with 7 columns and 50 rows or 30 rows as we set it up within the creation of the spreadsheet. In order to get the spreadsheet ID, we can select from the web URL to get the spreadsheet ID, and that's going to be contained within the web URL. So we're going to need to use that in order to connect to the spreadsheet and make updates to the sheet. I'm also going to create more screen size by hiding the menus so that we can focus on the content of the spreadsheet as we develop and we update the code using the Google Apps script standalone application. So going back into the project, select a function. I'm going to call it upSheet1, and this is what we're going to be using to update the sheet. So selecting the sheet object, and this is going to be just a string value where we're going to use the spreadsheet object and collecting to the spreadsheet app and using the open by ID method in order to select the spreadsheet object. And then within the sheet, we can select the spreadsheets that are available. So using the get sheets method is going to return back all of the sheets. And I'll just use the logger log in order to list out the sheets. So give this plural and sheets, and that's what we're going to be listing within the log. Let's run the up sheet, and that should give us a listing of all of the sheets that we currently have within the spreadsheet. Let's go ahead and we're going to create a new sheet, and we'll create a few different sheets within the spreadsheet. So creating it within a loop, and how about we create 5 sheets. We're going to increment the value of I by 1, and then within the loop, within the spreadsheet object, this is where we've got all of the functionality, and selecting the insert sheet method is going to allow us to insert a new sheet. And within here, we can set different parameters. So we can set the options where we want to insert a new sheet. So we can return it back as a sheet value as we create the loop, and that's going to insert the new sheet. And now for the sheet, set the name of the sheet, and this is going to be whatever we've got for the value of the incrementing value of I. So setting up a variable, call it new name, and it's going to be expecting a string value. So let's add the value of I plus 1 as we create the sheets, and then we'll set the new name of the sheets to new name. We can also insert the sheets. We can also use templates. So wherever we want to insert the sheets, we can set an index value of where we want to insert it. And this is where the sheet is going to get inserted. So it starts at 0, and we're going to set it at 1 to insert at sheet number 1 with the value of sheet number 1. So let's run the upSheet function, and that's added in several sheets into the project, And so he's adding the new sheets as the S1. And there's the sheet objects that we added and we created. So now when we loop through the sheet and we see all of the sheets, we can see the content of the sheets. This is going to be an array that we can use a for each loop, and looping through, getting the sheet value. We can get the index value of the sheet, and using the logger log, selecting the sheet object, we can get the sheet name and output that into the log. So this is producing an array of all of the sheets, and then we're going to loop through that array and output the sheet names. And so these new sheets, and we already have sheets with that existing name, so it's going to throw an error when we try to create a sheet with that name. So let's run some code here where we'll do a check to see if we can get the sheet by the new name. And I'll update this to be let. So in case we don't have a sheet by that name, we can select and we can update and use that sheet. So within the sheet object, we're going to get the sheet by name. And the name that we're going to be looking for is going to be the sheet name that we want to create. And I'll just call it sheet namer. This is the name that we want to look for. And if it exists, then this is going to return back the sheet object. And if it doesn't exist, then that means that we need to create a brand new sheet. So checking to see if the sheet exists, and if new name does not exist, then we're going to insert the sheet as the new name. And we can remove out that line of code. We don't have to specify an index as if we want to insert it just in the next available space. So now it's going to be inserting the sheets at the end of the rest of the sheets. And then here we want to set the sheet with its new name. And the name that we're going to set it by is going to be the sheet namer. So now when we run the code, if the sheet already exists, it's going to skip over adding the sheet. And then as it loops through, it's going to output all of the existing sheets. So let's try adding in some extra sheets. And remember, it is checking by the sheet namer and getting the sheet by the name. And if the sheet does not exist, it's going to return back null. And that means that we want to create a sheet. So we've got the condition there to create a sheet if it doesn't exist already. So let's run that code again. And that should add the remaining sheets into the sheet object. So that's all of our sheets. So we've got under sheet 1, and now we've ended up adding in S6 to S10. That was sheet 7 where we threw the error, and then the remaining ones were 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So these ones are increasing as we're adding them, and these ones were decreasing because we were setting the index number. So now we've got a whole bunch of sheets within the sheet array as we're looking through the sheet objects. And so this is how you can add sheets to your spreadsheet using Google Script. Let's create another function, and this one can be used to add content into the sheet. So I'll call it adder, and we'll call it adder1 in case we want to add some other ones. So the first thing we want to do is we want to select the sheet object and select the sheet that we want to add content into. So we're using the open by ID, then we've got the spreadsheet object by getting the ID value, and now we select the sheet that we want to use. So we know that we saw that there's a bunch of different spreadsheets here. We can get the sheet by name and put into the sheet object. You can also use the spreadsheet and just use the get sheets and return the sheet within the array, and then use the first one within the index. So this is just automatically whatever the first sheet is within the spreadsheet, it's going to use that spreadsheet. Let's create an array, and we can use this array of content in order to add to our sheet. So adding in some content here, and those are just some string values, some words. And let's take the sheet object and append a row of content. So it is expecting an array that we're updating. So we can send that whole array object and append the row into the sheet. Let's select the adder1 and see what we get there. So now I'll go to the first sheet, and it's automatically just adding it into the first sheet. If we want to add it into the first cell, we'd still be appending the row, but we could specify which cell that we want to update. So let's select a range, and the range is going to use the spreadsheet where we can get range, and then within the range we need to specify what the range is that we want to select. If we want to place it in the first cell, that's going to be the value of 1 and 1. We can also get the values, and the values are going to be returned back as an array. So let's select the range of the spreadsheet. So this is still one of the methods that is available within the sheet object. And the range can be set either by just using the call. So we'll select a few different ranges, and I'll show you some options that you have for the ranges. So we can select a row and a column, and that will return back a range. And then now that we've got the range, we can set a value within the range. And the value that we can set from the range is just going to be requiring a string value that we're setting within the range. So let's add the string value, and then we'll select another range. And using the same sheet object, let's get the range. And this time we're going to ask for the row, the column within the range, and we can also select the number of rows to return back. So that's going to be another argument that we can add in there. So the third argument is going to be the number of rows. So let's actually start at 2 and 1, and then the number of rows that we want to return back is going to be 3. So this is going to be the range that we're selecting. And in order to set a value, we actually have to set values. And the values that we're setting, that array actually has to match the array that we're setting. So actually, let's bring that back down to 2 and create an array. And then we're going to have a multi-dimensional array. And we'll just set the values this way and run the code. And what happened here is the number of columns in the data does not match the number of rows in the range. So if you don't have the right range set within the values, it's going to throw an error. The dimensions of the values that you're setting within the range always have to match the range dimensions, and you can tell the range dimensions by the number of rows multiplied by the number of columns that is within the range that we're selecting. So this range is starting at row number 2, column number 1, and returning back 2 rows, which would be 1 column of data. So let's try that again. And this time we were able to add to the spreadsheet. So we selected this row and added the data within that range. So starting at row 2, in column 1, which is A, we added the 2 values. Let's set another range. And this time we're going to be selecting a range starting at row number 4. And we can start at column number 2. We'll select 2 rows of data, and this will be 3 rows of content. So we need to add in 3 items there, and this range has to match, the dimensions have to match the range that we've set out. And so now this is going to be using range number 3. Let's run the code again. And we selected this as the range number 3. This was the range number 2. And then we had range number 1, which was actually being overwritten because we're starting at 1 and 1. Let's start at row number 1 and use column number 5. And this is where we're going to set the value for Laurence. You can also get the range with the notation. So that's another way that you can get the range. And getting the range is one of the most important things when you are trying to interact with the sheet content, as this is the range that you want to interact with. So let's select the sheet. And if we want to get content from cell number E3, and this is going to be expecting a string value. So we're setting that as E3. And now for range 4, we're just going to have the single cell. So we can set a value, and the value that we're going to set is just going to be my last name there within the range 4. Let's run that again. And now we're setting that value there. So this is the 4th range that we're setting. And you can also have a range, and also included in the range, you can specify the sheet name. So just as you would select content, if we want to add it to S6, we could indicate that where we're setting the range. So S6 would be the sheet, and then getting the values. So S6 is the sheet name, and then returning back the range, and that's going to start at A1 and go to C2. And then we'll set the values for range 5. So this is going to be plural, and it's going to be secting 3 rows and 3 columns. So let's set this to 7, 8, and 9. And save that. And again, the range doesn't match, but it does give you an error indication. The data has 3, but the range has 2. So it's looking at 2 rows. So let's update that. We in fact did only list out 2, so we want to list out 3. So let's save that and try to run that one more time. And so this time there was no errors. So we're able to update the S6 content with this range object. And then of course we're continuing to append rows of content into the spreadsheet, and then we're adding the names there within the spreadsheet as well. Let's add another adder function. So we'll give it a new name and we'll call it adder2, and selecting the sheet values. This time let's get the sheet by name. So we'll interact with S7, and we're selecting the sheet with the S7 name. And let's close off the function. And let's write some content to the sheet. So looping through the array and using the array method, and we'll pick up the index value as we iterate through the content. And here we're going to append the row to the sheet, append the row. And so this is expecting an array of content. So we'll have the value of the index +1, and you can comma separate out the values, cell value. So let's run adder2. Now we're writing into sheet number 7, and using the language, we're going to update the content from the cells. We're going to just rename that to val, and we'll have a few different languages. So one that will translate it into Spanish. So using the language app service, translate, and the value that we're translating, and this is going to be coming from English, and we'll translate that over into Spanish. The language codes are available at thecloud.google.com/translate docs languages. So these are all the language codes. Let's try another one. So take Latvian, and we'll translate another row into Latvian. Add that, and this is going to be Latvian, and it's coming from English and being translated into Latvian. And let's pick up one more. And then using the language app service, we're going to translate that into Korean, and then we'll add in all of these as rows of content. So there's the Latvian, there's the Spanish, and there's the Korean language that we're going to be appending the row to. So save that, and we'll run adder2 again, and we'll see what happens. So now we're getting the word, and it's being translated into multiple languages using the language app service. And let's create another function, and this one will clean up our sheet. I'll call it cleaner, as I want to get rid of the empty sheets so that we don't have any that don't have any of the data. So we're select all of the sheets within the spreadsheet. We're going to get all of the sheet values, and let's loop through the sheets within the sheets array using the for each. And this is going to get the sheet object, and let's check to see if there's content within the sheet. So as we loop through, we'll get the data from the sheet. So getting the sheet object, get data range, we'll select all of the data, and then let's get values that we're selecting within the sheet. And within the log, we're going to log out the data of each one of the sheets. So let's run the cleaner, and then this way we're going to know which sheets don't have any data. So if it's completely empty and devoid of any data, so if this item, if the index value is going to be 0, then we know there's nothing in the sheet. So do a data length, as these are arrays. So if the length is 1, there's going to be nothing in there. And we can also look within that first item there and get the length of that sheet. So these as well are just going to be 1. So it's not returning any content in there. So we can check to see, we have a condition to check to see if the data length is less than or equal to 1. And if it is, then this is the sheet that we want to delete. So for now, we'll use the logger and we'll log out the value of the sheet and we'll get sheet name. So run the cleaner. And so these are the sheets that we want to delete, that they don't have any content within it. So let's select the sheet and we can clear the sheet, which will clear the contents. And we can also delete the columns, delete rows from the sheet object. And in order to delete the sheet, we have to go through the spreadsheet object where we delete the sheet, and the parameter here that it's going to be expecting is going to be the sheet object. So all we need to do is enter the sheet object, and we know that this sheet doesn't have any length in it. So running this function is going to clean up our spreadsheet and remove all of the empty sheets. So as we see, we're removing out any sheets where we don't have any content contained within them. And if we run it again, it should be fairly straightforward because all the sheets right now have content within them. So that's how you can clean up all of your spreadsheet, removing out any excess sheets. So go ahead and give it a try. Create some sheets, add some content into the sheets, selecting the sheet content with the different range options that we've covered, and update the sheets. And then you can also do a cleaning of the sheet content. And you'll be ready to move on to the next lesson.